glad to see so many parents here. This is actually very reminiscent of my presentation to our employees yesterday. They all sat 3 rows back and away from me. But that's fine. And I'm going to a couple things about the presentation. First, you're obviously welcome. So I know some of you are going to have to leave at various points. That's fine. But last year, the recommendation came at that I shouldn't take questions till the end because some of you may have to leave and you really want to see as much of the presentation as possible. So we're going to try that this year. Just save your questions to the end. I'll be happy to answer all your questions. And we'll see how it goes. So it's at this point of the year when, in sort of actually in December, mid-December to sort of mid-January, I really start to reflect on where the school is. I work with the board on budgeting for next year and try to put all of this together. And when I reflect on where the school is, I tend to think about questions that guide that reflection. So I've asked 5 questions this year. Some are similar to last year, and I think 1 or 2 are a little bit new. You can see what those questions are that we're going to focus on this morning. And the first one has to do with our strategic plan. And it's good for us to just to refresh for a minute, take a look at the mission that we revised during this strategic planning process and the vision, where we want to be in 2018. And the vision statement came out of a visioning day process where 96 members of our community got together a year ago, November, and put the vision together. Now our strategic plan then tries to look over the next 5 years and make changes and strengthen areas we are currently doing so that we can achieve this vision of being a diverse community of learners who are widely recognized for their academic excellence, strength of character, and global awareness. So in order to accomplish that, we decided what do we need to begin this year. Those are the 4 main goals, and we put 28 initiatives together. And out of those initiatives, 28, I'm just going to talk a little bit about some that we're working on that you're probably aware of some of these already. And the first one's really interesting because written communication turns out is already a strength of the school. And it reminds me that when you do strategic planning, you look at your school's strengths, opportunities, challenges, and determine from there where you want to move forward. And you don't just take a look at your strengths and then put them aside. Sometimes you take a look at strengths and decide we want to make sure it remains strong and we want to build on it and strategically use it to advance the school. So when we talk about strengthening our writing, we know it's already good, very good. We want to make sure it remains good, gets better, and it's something that we can become so good at that we can really market our school specifically in terms of writing excellence. So that's what we're going to work on. One of the ways to do that is to put an even stronger program in the lower school and assess what we're doing in the middle school and the upper school to build upon that. I'm going to skip down to growth in character. I think that's a very, very important component. You're going to hear a lot today about statistics and data, but that they don't really address one of the most important parts of schooling, and that's creating good citizens, trustworthy, responsible students who live our 4 core values of respect, integrity, accountability, and resilience. And we've developed a common language for these and expectations for our faculty and staff. This is on our website. You probably can't read all of these, and I'm not going to go into it. But we went as an employee base, we looked at those 4 core values and said, how do we know we're doing this? What do we expect when we say, I'm a faculty, as a faculty, what does respect mean? And we came up with a number of qualities of respect and picked the 4 or 5 most important. So just reading this one, as a teacher, I show respect for students when I exhibit patience and understanding while maintaining structure. When I listen, when I incorporate their ideas into the classroom, when I differentiate instruction. So this is really important because we hold ourselves accountable now to these values. We can go back to our faculty and say, let's make sure we're really embodying our core value of respect with students. And we look at the clear guidelines for this. We did that, respect for parents, respect for colleagues. We went through this as staff and as faculty, and then we have the same qualities for staff. So it may be slightly different for staff than they are for faculty. So this is a really important step. We're going to do this with upper school students. We're going to do it in a fashion with middle school. Lower school, it's not, they have their own 3 core guidelines that embody these values. And we're going to do it with parents. This is really important because parents are a member of our community. We want parents to be clear about what we mean when we say we embody respect. How do parents act in a respectful way towards each other, towards faculty, towards administration? So next Tuesday during the Parents Association meeting, I encourage you to come and help us develop these guidelines for respect, integrity, accountability, and resilience for parents. This is for you. Okay. Regional reputation. Carla Whitwell in admissions has begun an ambassadors program where 54 parents have signed on to be trained. They come monthly for meetings to talk about how we can spread the word about Cape Fear Academy excellence in the community so that more mission-appropriate families will strongly consider this as an educational option for their children. So 54 parents have signed on. If you're not involved, we'd love you to contact Carla and tell her you're interested. What does it really mean? At the minimum, it just means committing yourself to learning a little bit more about how to market the school with friends in the community, and occasionally attend maybe an admissions event and work with us in developing leads out in the community so more families enroll their kids at our school. It's been very successful so far. 3 parents have held information, I call them sort of informal information sessions for families in their neighborhoods at their houses. Let's see if I can remember. I know, let's see, the Wells, the Bakers, and the last one was Van Vliet. So been very helpful, leading to new families coming to the school. So we're also working on a refresh of our internet with the ultimate goal to merge our external site and our internal site so that it's one powerful communication tool for the entire school and it's easy to navigate. We'll work on that probably over the next 6 to 12 months so that hopefully the internal site, which is not particularly attractive and sort of hard to use at times, becomes seamlessly integrated into our external site and much more easy and attractive for parents. Financial sustainability is essential. We're looking at our business model. What is it going to take to make sure the school is successful next year, in 5 years, and 30 years down the road? There's a board committee that's looking at this very carefully. And deciding on pricing as part of that. You know, how are we priced in the community? Are there opportunities to price our school differently so that we can attract more students? What are the pros and cons of that? Looking carefully at that. And the last item on here that I'll mention, auxiliary programs, which has been very, very successful in sort of our first year of ramping up our efforts. Mary Lyons Mitchell did an excellent job in our summer programs and now in our ACE programs. So you can see gross revenues for ACE have doubled. I think we were about 70% up this summer in total revenue for our summer camps, and we are continuing to grow that. Our goal for next year, we can't expect to grow 70% each year. I'd love to, but 25% increase over last year is our goal for this coming summer. And the key, to me, even more important than the revenue, is bringing more students onto campus. more students who will have a great experience in the summer and then might start to look at the school for education during the year. Okay, and if you're interested in looking in more detail at the strategic plan and what we're doing, you can click on this website. By the way, this PowerPoint will be on the web. You can click on the link there, and it takes you to this full spreadsheet with each of the 28 initiatives under all the goals. And each of these initiatives have a mid-year report. You can look at, if you're interested in what we're doing in each of these initiatives. And we're not going to obviously look at this right now. But this is really important. It's how we're going to advance the school. And we need to do this in a systematic, formal way so that we meet our vision of and really strengthening Cape Fear Academy. Okay, so next question is, are we attracting and retaining the right students? Real important. So we start to look at retention history. And this is a pattern that we need to break. We've had declining student retention since for the last 4 years, and it's essential that we move this in a positive direction. You can see what the average retention is for NAIS day schools, and we need to meet that and then actually do better. It's essential to the school's long-term success and financial sustainability. It's essential, by the way, to enrollment and tuitions. As enrollment grows, it's much easier to keep tuition down because we have increased revenue. And there's plenty of room here to increase enrollment with current staffing, okay? Because classes aren't full. And by doing that, obviously you gain more revenue and you can keep costs down. Enrollment by division. So again, you take a look, and it's real interesting to see where the decrease has been over the past 5 years. Lower school has been hit the hardest. This is a national trend, by the way, so while we're real disappointed with this here, it's something that schools around the country are experiencing. Even strong schools are now struggling for enrollment in lower school, and there's good reasons for that. It has to do with the economy, has to do with increased competition at the lower school level. But we know we can do better. And a lot of the strategic plan and the changes that have occurred in the last year or so have been geared to improving the lower school, to making sure it's outstanding and it reaches out to a wide range of students who can be successful at the school. Last year, folks asked for a little bit more data on diversity. It's also part of our strategic plan, and they wanted to know how do we stack up with other independent schools. There are two sort of benchmarking groups that we're looking at. The Southeast Benchmarking Schools, it's a group that I actually put together in December of schools in communities that are fairly similar to Wilmington in demographics. They're also, to be a benchmarking school, you had to be an NAIS school, so a school very similar in mission and philosophy to Cape Fear Academy. You also had to be the only independent or NAIS school in your city. And by finding these schools, we can really compare data pretty carefully and get a sense of how we're doing. Also can compare when heads get together and start to talk about strategies to strengthening the areas where we need improvement. This benchmarking group, by the way, the heads and I will get together at a conference at the end of February and start to talk about this data and strategies that we have for improving areas. So you can see there's room to grow in terms of diversity. Financial aid's interesting. We're right about in the middle of sort of both groups, both the Southeast and the NC aspirational schools. You know, the NC aspirational schools are schools that we would like to sort of be in their group in terms of student performance and some of the qualities of school operation. But we know that Wilmington isn't Greensboro or Charlotte or Raleigh. And so we know there's different factors in demographics and in cost of living and salaries and in fundraising capabilities and all of that. So we know we're not going to reach some of those targets. Okay. Current admissions, so how does it look now for next year? Actually, we're in a real good place. So this is comparing our admissions season right now to where we were at the same point last year. Okay. And these are the applicants we have right now in hand for next year. The shaded areas in gold are grades where I'm very pleased, where we're doing really well compared to last year, and things look strong. So hopefully that will continue and enrollment will actually increase as a result of this. Now, it's not just enrolling students without any sort of qualifications. That's also pretty important. I talked a lot about this to faculty yesterday because one of the consistent messages that I heard from faculty, staff, and parents over the past 2 years was that the school sort of had gotten a little bit too wide on the types of students that we were admitting to the school, to CFA over the last few years, that we had sort of cast a little bit too broad net, and it was challenging teachers' ability to work with students effectively in the classroom. If you have too wide a margin of student ability, it becomes difficult for teachers to meet all the students' needs to the level that we expect of our teachers. Okay? We certainly could teach everyone if we want, but then you have to figure out, are you really meeting the needs of all your students well? And so we've defined our admissions picture a little bit tighter than we have in the past. We can work with students with disabilities to a certain extent. We can only work with a certain number of those students effectively at the school and still meet the needs of every student in our classes. So in order for us to maintain excellence academically, we had to narrow our enrollment picture a little bit. And that's sort of a paradox in a sense, because while we want enrollment to grow, we're also sort of narrowing a little bit the scope of the students that we're going to take. And that, to some extent, that does explain lower enrollment. But we also firmly believe that while it's a short-term lower enrollment, it has long-term benefits. Okay? By knowing a little bit better who we can best educate, educating those students extremely well will ultimately grow the school and become more successful. So when we look at our standardized testing for our students, and again, this is only one element of our entrance requirements, there are other elements as well, we see that the students we're taking are a little bit stronger than they were a couple years ago. And ultimately, it's making, we think, for a better educational experience for the students that are here right now. All right, so that's the enrollment picture, which encapsulated is we think we're stabilizing enrollment. We're seeing positive signs for increasing new students next year, but we have to do better. We have to do better with retaining students and attracting even more new students. But how well are our students achieving once they're here? This is really terrific news. This is, we're going to start with our youngest students. These are our LE and kindergarten students. And what this sort of graph shows you is that in reading literacy, when our students started in August and were assessed in the Little Explorer program, they basically were reading at the kindergarten level. And then if in only 5 months in December, they're up an entire grade. This is the average student in our LE program in December is reading at the first grade level. The kindergartners start out at the first grade level and are reading at the second grade level. Their literacy at the second grade level as of December. These are the LE2s, by the way, okay? Not the LE1s. The LE2s are about four years old or so. These are the students who've been here a second year. So you might want, I emphasize that because the reason they're starting out at the kindergarten level, we feel, is because they were here for a year in our LE1 program. And they start out that way. Same thing with the kindergartners. Most of our kindergartners were here last year as LE2s. And so they've start out at the first grade level as kindergartners and then already at the second grade mid-year. So really strong results. Okay, moving on now to achievement for 3rd through 8th grade on our ERB tests. And again, I want to emphasize that I think the data is important. It's good for us to measure ourselves objectively, but a lot of the success of our students, is anecdotal. It's their love of learning. It's their enjoyment of going into class and doing the work. It's little anecdotes that tell just as strong a picture as the data. But data is important. And so this slide takes a look at where the average CFA student is in a variety of reading tests in 3rd through 8, a variety of tests in grades 3 through 8. And what it tells us is that there are some tests where the average student at CFA does better than 90% of students around the country. For example, I'm going to pick grade 6th grade. So the average 6th grader last spring did better than 91% of the students around the country in terms of vocabulary learning, and also did better than 91% of the students around the country in terms of writing mechanics. So our average in these tests is outstanding. Okay, that's the strong results. There are 7 tests that on these ERBs, 7 subtests that all the students take. These are the ones that were really outstanding. The others were good, but these were really outstanding for our average student. But it's not just the average student that we're concerned about. We're also interested in the students in the lower end of the class and the higher end of the class. That's pretty important, okay? Because often, we will get questions that say, okay, we know your strong students are great. What about your students who may struggle a little bit? How well are they achieving? Well, the students at the bottom quartile of our classes are also doing extremely well. And what this slide does is it says, if I average all of the 7 subtests together for our 3rd graders, the bottom quartile, the student to the 25th percentile in 3rd grade, does better than 73% of the students around the country. It puts them in the 73rd percentile. And you can see what it is for each of the grades. So the bottom quartile of our school achieves really well nationally. Another way to look at that more specifically, okay, I've pulled out the tests where we really excel in the bottom quartile. And if you take a look at the 5th grade last year, so if you had a 5th grader who maybe wasn't in the top of the class last year, and you're wondering about, well, what does that really mean? Well, the 5th grader last year in the bottom quartile at CFA scored better than 91% of the students around the country in writing mechanics and 92% in mathematics. All right, that's particularly strong. And there are other examples of this too for other grades. That's really strong if our students are doing that well, even at the bottom of our class. So last year, you also, parents asked about, well, we get it that our students score well compared to students around the country and compared to public school students nationally. We understand that our students do really well, but what about compared to other independent school students? So I've pulled out some data that address this. And now if you ask me, where would I expect that's sort of interesting. So where would we expect our students to be compared to other independent school students? And there's no right or wrong answer to that. It's sort of, it's interesting. But I would say that we'd want to be probably at least right in the middle of other independent school students around the country, maybe slightly higher. But when we take the ERB test and we compare, I pulled out places that were really distinguishable. Places where our scores were greater than 10% above or 10% below the median of other independent school students. So if it wasn't 10%, sometimes we're a little bit better than other independent school students. Sometimes we're maybe not quite as strong in some areas. But when it's more than 10%, it says we're either doing something really well or we need to look at it a little bit more carefully and find out why. So when we look at the subtests, this is what we find. There's only one subtest out of the 7 in each grade where we've scored lower than, worse than 10% below the independent school median. Okay? And that's in 3rd graders' auditory comprehension. And that's basically when you read a passage to a 3rd grader and they have to answer questions, we don't do as well. We're looking into why that might be. I'm not sure why that is. We're trying to figure that out. On the other side, where are the areas where we really outperform independent school students by more than 10%? And you can see in every grade, except 6, there's at least one area where we really excel. And in 5th grade, tremendous achievement. Now, the 5th grade last year, I think, was a particularly strong grade, but as I'm going to show you in a minute, it didn't really start out that strong. That a lot of the gains, I think, in our 5th grade were due to outstanding teaching in 3rd, 4th, and 5th grade. Right? And I'm going to show you that in a minute. I'll show it to you. We'll go right to it. Okay, so I'm going to start, though, with the 4th grade. Here's another independent school comparison. Okay, so what you have behind me are the 4th grade, from 4th graders last spring, that class, last year's current 5th grade, last year's 4th grade, and this is their ERB scores on the 7 subtests starting in red. Red is when they took the test in the fall of 2011. The green column is fall 2012, and the blue column is spring 2013. So last year, it had an unusual circumstance where we decided last year that we wanted to change when we gave our ERBs to the end of the year. There are some good reasons for that in terms of tracking progress throughout the year and then using that as a guide for summer work. But it enabled us to see any changes from fall to spring when compared with our independent school peers. So when you look at this particular subtest, reading comprehension, so last year's 4th graders, when they were in 3rd grade, they performed at the 38th percentile in terms of reading comprehension. They were below the median of their independent school peers. A year later, they're at the 57th percentile. Those 3rd graders, which are relatively the same kids, maybe a couple of students left, a couple of students came in new, but relatively the same class, all of a sudden had huge growth, which continued in the spring. So this class of 4th graders went from being in the 38th percentile in the fall of their 3rd grade to the end of 4th grade in the 65th percentile of independent school peers. So all of a sudden, they're doing significantly better than their independent school peers in terms of reading comprehension. That is a huge difference. We saw a difference in writing mechanics, increases then in writing concepts and in mathematics and quantitative reasoning. Again, increases from when there's no red, that means they didn't take the subtest. Sometimes the subtests do change as kids get older. But what it says to me is there's significant growth in our students as compared to their independent school peers, which is really powerful. 5th grade, very similar, actually. What I would expect, again, is things to be pretty much level, that there's really quality teaching going on in a lot of independent schools around the country. But look again what happens. Reading comprehension starts out a little bit above the 50th percentile and grows all the way to 75th percentile for these 5th graders in the fall, drops a little bit back to 69th percentile, but huge change from the time that they were in 3rd grade to 5th grade. Again, huge change from 3rd grade to 5th grade. Huge change from 3rd grade to 5th grade. This is in math. So what it tells us at the end of the day, this 5th grade was really outperforming their independent school peers much in every one of these subtests. Okay. Now I'm not going to go through each of these other examples, but I have an example for every grade of at least one place where our students do well compared to other independent school students. And the way to look at this is the graph on the right is the independent school population. In the middle, by the way, is suburban and then national. And when you look at this particular test, this is 3rd graders in writing mechanics, you find that most of the scores bunch in the average to above average range. We're the gold shaded area. And so what it tells us is our distribution of scores is much more on the average to above average end than independent school population. So another way to look at this is that 36% of our students are above average compared to 23% of independent school. So I'm not going to go through all these. I'm going to skip because I've spent some time on the lower school. I'm going to skip to a really powerful example, which is 8th grade algebra last year. So when you have 8th graders, 26 of our 8th graders took algebra last year, okay, or higher. And those students take the Algebra 1 ERB test, and we compare their results to other 8th graders, independent schools who took algebra. And you can see that all of our students are in the average to above average range. 69% of our students were above average compared to the 23% norm for independent schools on a norming distribution. All right, I'm going to SAT scores. This just gives you a sense of where we are with SAT scores. This is sort of interesting, slightly better than our independent school peers in the Southeast. And this is why when you look at the ERBs, I expect our scores to be a little bit higher than our independent school peers on ERBs because our SATs are a little bit higher. But when you get, again, that's sort of when you get to 10 percentage points above independent school, that's significant. I wouldn't expect that. All right, AP performance. Then we go to our upper school students. This is really the best way to sort of compare apples to apples when you're looking at upper school students in an objective way, how we're doing compared to other students, both at public and private schools around the country, because it's the same test that everyone takes. It's a standard curriculum. Here's our data compared to our North Carolina aspirational schools. Not quite as high as 2012, but still very strong and very impressive. Last year, some folks asked, well, how about 4 or 5s on the AP exam? A 3, 4, or 5 is considered a passing score. 4 or 5 is when schools will begin to, if schools give credit for AP exams, they'll start to give them when you score 4 or 5. So we're not quite as high as some of these schools with 4 or 5s, but we are still very high. The other difference that we have is that we also require all of our students to take the test, and not all of these schools require students to take every student to take the test, but the results are strong. How do we compare with our benchmarking schools? So just a qualification. The data from the previous slide is available publicly on the school's websites. It's not available publicly with our benchmarking schools. Some of them don't publish it, that data. So we share this data confidentially. So I can't tell you which school is which, but they're all on here, and we have the highest scores for our Southeast benchmarking schools on AP exams. It's also important to how are we doing compared to our peers. Okay, I got to say a little bit more about this because a parent emailed me sort of a great question yesterday, which was something like this. She's been hearing from people in the community that students at New Hanover High School's Lyceum scored better than our students on AP tests, were getting more credit at colleges for their AP scores, and had a better success rate of getting into state universities than kids from Cape Fear Academy. So that's an interesting claim. And I don't know how you make that claim with any sort of validity, because there's no data out there that they don't have our data, so I don't know how they can even make that claim. So it may be some anecdotal stuff that really isn't very helpful making decisions. But this is data that's real. And we certainly outscore New Hanover on our AP exams. It's right there over the past 2 years. Okay, you can look at our pass rate. Still, though, I don't know how many of these tests at New Hanover were from kids from the Lyceum. My guess is that almost all of them are, but I can't make that claim legitimately that we do better than the Lyceum on AP scores. I know we do better than New Hanover High School, so that's a tough thing to make that claim. I'm going to talk about access to colleges in a minute too. And our kids do really well. So And last year I showed this slide because, you know, I think it's powerful, and you need to see this, and I'm going to qualify this. So what about nationally? Some parents had asked about how to compare us to some of the top boarding schools around the country. Okay, and that's a tough comparison because some of these schools are incredibly selective. Choate Rosemary Hall has SAT scores that are 300 points higher than ours, okay, and have a huge selective market. They attract kids from all over the country. Still, we do really well compared to boarding schools on AP exams. One thing I need to be clear about, when these schools publish their AP scores, it's the percentage of their students in their graduating class who earn a 3, 4, or 5. And that's why our score for this year is 93%. The other data you saw is the percentage of total exams taken that are 3, 4, or 5. It's a slight difference, but when you think about it, it's meaningful. The much more telling statistic is the number of exams taken, total exams taken that are 3, 4, or 5. This is important too, but this could be, you know, you could have 93% of your students get 1, 3, and the rest of their scores are 0s, 1s, and 2s, and they would still be 93%. But just to give you a sense, that's not happening, by the way, but it is a different statistic. But either way, Cape Fear Academy students are doing really well compared to boarding school students around the country. And AP Scholars, that's really important because it shows that, it tells me this: we take the students that we admit here who are good students, very capable, and we challenge them and raise them up. And 2/3 of our class receive this AP Scholars designation, which is very, very strong. College success. Okay, so this is why there's different ways to look at college success, and we'll look at admissions in a second. This is pretty powerful. 80% graduate in 5 years compared to the other schools in this area. 80% in 5 years is about the national average for independent schools. College placement. Becky does a fantastic job in working with families from sometimes as early as 8th grade on to help them get to the place where they can have a good list and get accepted into schools where they want to go. Here's where I was talking before about acceptances. Our 4-year average. This is really a tricky statistic that I'm actually trying to put more data together for you folks to look at in the future. Because while we outperform the North Carolina acceptance rate at these universities, it's really difficult to get a sense of this, because whereas I think it was 10 years ago the average senior applied to about 6 schools, now the average senior applies to 10 or 10 and a half schools. So if you're applying to more schools, you're going to have more hits and more misses. And so our acceptance rate may not be as high as we'd like it to be, but more kids are trying. So what we really need to look at is what are the standards, the data behind our kids who get accepted and then get denied to these schools. And what I think you're going to find is this, is that our students will get accepted at a higher rate. That's not true. I think what you're going to find is that our students who get accepted to Chapel Hill and State have SAT scores that aren't quite as high as their average entrance scores. Okay, so that kids from here will get accepted, even though their SATs may be a bit lower, and they're getting accepted because their AP scores are high and their GPAs are high. And the reason colleges like Chapel Hill like that is because it's the best indication of achievement. How hard are you willing to work if you're given a certain curriculum? And that's what the AP scores will do. Now, I'm pushing the APs a lot. I'm not a huge fan of them, but since they're such an important part of the college admissions process, we need to do our best with them, and we do great work with them. Okay. So we also need to look at national schools. Again, I just show this to parents because it indicates that if this is your goal as a student at CFA, there's plenty of precedent for those who've gone before you to be able to get into the top schools in this country. If that's your goal, you can do it. Next year, let's see, we have another Naval Academy student accepted already for next year. May have a second one. He hasn't heard yet. And for a lot of these most competitive universities, they won't give their decisions till later in the spring, so we don't know yet about next year. This is going back to college success. Our four-year graduation rate, it's interesting, is well above the national average, 66%. The other thing I'd say about getting back to that question from the parent was she said, so our AP scores were better. Our success rate at getting into colleges, I think that they're better, but I don't have any specific data that really can say that kids from here get into Chapel Hill or State at a better rate than kids from New Hanover or Ashley or anywhere. I mean, that's really hard. I do have data, and I don't have it pulled out, that does show that once you're there at the end of the freshman year, CFA students have higher grades than students from public schools in this area and from public schools around the state. And that's data that we can get because it's public data from the UNC system, and each independent school in the state gets a report on your students' freshman year progress. So we can put that together, and we do know that our students do better once they get to Chapel Hill and State than public school students in this area and from New Hanover High School. Now, I can't say it's better than the Lyceum because I don't know if there are other kids from New Hanover who didn't go to the Lyceum who go to Chapel Hill or not. Okay, other areas that we really need to just make sure we pay attention to, because this is really important in educating the whole child, rounding out our children's education here. And what we find is that our performance in the arts continue to be outstanding. We provide tremendous opportunity for our students to participate in after-school arts from early on all the way up, and our students win awards. I'm going to just skip down and highlight the visual art, because 4 Gold Key Awards for middle and 4 for upper school, 8 total, is a phenomenal accomplishment. Roughly 15% of the entries into the competition are accepted. We had 18 students submit work, which is great in and of itself, that 18 of our students decided they wanted to try this competition. 8 out of the 18 won awards, roughly 50%. 15% is the average acceptance, or average winner. There was only one school in this half of North Carolina for these Gold Key Awards, one private school that had more students than student winners than us, that happened to be Parrott Academy, Arundel Parrott, but we had more students win awards than any of the private schools in Raleigh or any other part of this half of the state. So terrific work in the in visual arts. Athletics, our students really compete well. Interesting, this is sort of a great trivia question. Our only state champion last year was our cheerleading squad. Might not know that. So, but the stat that I really like is the 92% participate, which means we provide opportunity for students to play. Moorhead Kane, most difficult scholarship to win nationally. We do well in getting kids to the semifinalist level. After that, it is very, very difficult. Okay, I'm going to finish in a minute or two, and then we'll take questions. So the next question we look at, in terms of the state of the school, is the school on sound financial footing? The school has been, I think, extremely well managed financially over the past 7-8 years, as it took on some debt in order to provide outstanding facilities for our students. at a difficult time. It raised $4 million in a capital campaign a few years back, and then borrowed money at a great interest rate so that we could enjoy outstanding facilities. This building, the new gym, fields across the street are examples. And as a result of that, even in a declining enrollment time, we've been able to balance the budget for 6 out of 7 years. We're on track this year to have a balanced budget as well. So financial management, I feel, is a strength of the school. And I'm going to come back to tuition increase in a minute and explain that. But so what lies ahead for 2014 and 15? You can see there are 6 or 7 things listed here across the school. All have to do with strategic initiatives. The middle school physical education program, we're still ironing out some details with that. And if you're a middle school parent, you'll hear more about that in the next 3 or 4 weeks. The middle school trips to Cheerio and to Donley. So we stopped this Cheerio trip about 4 or 5 years ago due to finances. And when I met with the middle school teachers this year at one point after their current trips, and we talked about the kids' experience, every single one of those teachers said that the Cheerio experience was fantastic for our students, and that if there was any way we could return to that, we should do it. And so we're going to make that, we made that decision to budget for that so that our 8th graders have a much stronger outdoor education, team bonding experience. We're strengthened World Exchange Program. You'll hear more about that in the spring, but our vision of sending students overseas to live with a family for a couple of weeks, to tour areas, cultural areas in that country, is a phenomenal growth opportunity for our students. The 8 students that went last year came back, and each of them said they've been changed. That it was a phenomenal experience, vastly different than traveling with their parents. They said that they like travel. Don't get me wrong, they like traveling with you. They appreciate your taking them places, but being able to immerse themselves in a culture and use the language was life-changing for them. And so we have a way to continue to build that into our 10th grade program. Re-examine strategic initiatives. So we may have we'll have some new initiatives next year, but not too many. New athletic conference that'll reduce travel for our upper school students. But on the whole next year, we're going to review what we're doing, revise, and strengthen. Because over the past year or two, we've seen significant change at Cape Fear Academy. Changes that are all, I'm convinced, going to move the school forward and become an even stronger school. But we can't keep changing at the pace we are now. All right? It's going to drive our employees crazy. So we're going to settle in and do better what we're already doing and still have a few changes in there. All right, so to give you a sense of what's been new this year, just to remind folks how much has been new, you can look at your particular division if you want and get a sense of what's new. In addition to this, there have been new operational things going on. We have the holiday market was new. And I can't forget some of the Ambassadors program and admissions new. There are other new things that are operational that aren't on here. And that brings us to tuition for next year and explain what's happening in tuition. So when we try to build our tuition, the first thing we do is we look at all the requests from our current faculty and staff and figure out which are the ones that are strategic and we really want to put in place. We take those and we say, how can we cut or replace what we're already doing so it doesn't, so we don't incur additional costs for new materials or new resources or new programs, and we work that way. And then we look at where we are now and say, okay, what are we actually going to add next year, and how does that impact tuition? So when we look at what we're increasing tuition for, you have an understanding of why your tuition is going up a certain amount. And it's based on what we feel we need to add to the school that we can't add through cutting something else or growing enrollment. And the last point before I talk a little bit about these is the growing enrollment. It turns out this budget next year is based on 570 students. Okay? We're graduating a class of 66, which is a big class, and it's hard to replace all those students with new students coming up from the bottom. So what we need to do is increase enrollment in the future, and it'll keep some of these costs down. And we can add without increasing tuition. But next year, until we strengthen our student retention and increase enrollment, we're going to have to increase tuition a little bit in order to meet these needs. So we have an employee salary increase of 1% next year. Health insurance benefits are expected to rise. We don't know exactly how much when we get our new rates in a few months, but our agent has told us 15% is probably what you ought to build in for your budget, a 15% health insurance increase for our employees. Strategic planning and marketing. This is a really important initiative that we feel is essential. And there's two components of this that are going to cost us something. One is to strengthen our marketing message and materials so that what we send out and the way we try to attract new families is more professionally done and more strategically and research-based. And that, we think, is essential to increasing enrollment. The other component is a new position in our admissions staff that's geared to attracting new students and new families. And this is something that came out of our strategic financial committee, and it works something like this. It goes something like this. So we know that there are a certain number of families out in our community who can afford to send their students to Cape Fear Academy but aren't right now. And it turns out when we look at the data, we actually can identify about 100 families per grade, roughly 100 families per grade who aren't here now, who have enough income to send their kids here. Now we need to figure out a way to reach those families, and the Ambassadors program is one way, through your help is one way. The second way is to have an admissions person out in the community who works in a more sales-oriented manner to try to convince and to meet and to work with families out in the community that this is a place they need to come and at least give us a chance and take a look. And it's a much more traditional sales approach to admissions that when I explain this to sales people, entrepreneurs and salespeople out in the community, they get it right away and they say, yeah, you need to do this because it's a different sort of world out there. Boarding schools, by the way, have gotten this, for a while they've been having these kinds of positions to try to reach out to communities where they don't normally exist. So we're going to try to hire, we haven't exactly landed the name for this position yet, but it's sort of like a super salesman in the community who's going to help us bring families in to tour the school. Because we know that when families tour Cape Fear Academy and they see the school with Carla or with Susan Harrell or with Allison Reed, turns out 75% of the families that take tours here enroll their students. Not just apply, they enroll. So if we can get more families to come in and tour the school, enrollment will increase. Additional programs, part-time reading specialist. For a very limited additional cost to parents, we can add another half-time reading specialist. It goes back to our strategic initiative of strengthening our reading program in our lower school to make sure it's absolutely fantastic in K-5. So, $315 increase next year for lower school, turns out 2.15%. That's for students in grades rising grades 2 through 5. Because it turns, that's for students who are going into first grade from kindergarten, that's one of our bumps, a big jump. So that increase, that sort of percentage doesn't hold. Same thing for 5th to 6th. There's a jump from 5th to 6th tuition that doesn't really reflect this increase. But for students in grades 7th or 8th You have a slightly bigger increase, $430, 2.8%. The only difference here is, or the difference here, is that there's an increase where in tuition to help us pay for a full-time Chinese teacher. Our teacher right now is part-time. She teaches a half-time load. And middle school trips are going to cost something. And then there's also a small increase in parents for our World Exchange program. And then for upper school, it's very similar. Increase for the World Exchange program and a full-time Chinese teacher. Turns out our full-time Chinese teacher also teaches English as a second language to our Chinese international students, so there's a small cost associated with that for our upper school. We're in total 2.6% increase for upper school tuition. Okay, so last slide, quick review. In sum, I think the school's in great shape. The most important part of this is our student experience, I think, is fantastic here. I'm really pleased with that. On the other side, the biggest need for this school is to increase enrollment via new students and better student retention. And with that, I'm happy to answer questions. Thanks for your attention, by the way.